The attack came from ahead. This was not possible with any weapon we knew. Those were the chilling words, written by Kapitan Lieutenant Baron Wilhelm von Klemmer, commander of the U-boat U-333, following the most terrifying encounter of his career. November 1943. North Atlantic. Korvettenkapitän Peter Kruger, commanding the U-333 at periscope depth, was stalking convoy SL-139. He'd made this approach dozens of times. Identify the escort pattern, find the gap, strike before the destroyers could respond. But something was different this time. The British destroyer didn't turn away to drop depth charges behind her. She accelerated directly toward U-333's position. Kruger ordered an emergency dive, expecting the familiar pattern of depth charges rolling off the destroyer's stern, giving him precious seconds to maneuver away. Instead, he heard a sound like hail on a metal roof. Multiple impacts on the upper hull casing, but no explosions. 2 seconds later, the world ended. The weapon that shocked him was called the Hedgehog, and it represented a fundamental deadly shift in the mathematics of anti-submarine warfare, a shift German U-boat commanders discovered too late. By early 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached its crisis point. German U-boats were sinking Allied merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. In March 1943 alone, U-boats achieved their greatest success, sinking over 100 merchant vessels, nearly 3 ships every day. The Allied response had remained largely unchanged since 1918. Destroyers and corvettes hunted submarines with ASDIC, which Americans called sonar. Once they detected a U-boat, they would race towards the contact, then turn away at the last moment to roll depth charges off their stern. This method had 3 fundamental problems that killed Allied sailors every single day. First, the moment a destroyer turned to drop depth charges, it lost sonar contact with the submarine. The turning maneuver and the destroyer's own propeller noise made tracking impossible. For 30 to 45 seconds during the attack run, the submarine could maneuver freely, unobserved. But the real problem came after. The depth charge explosions created such turbulence that sonar remained useless for 15 minutes. 15 minutes of total blindness, while the submarine escaped. U-boat commanders called this window das Geschenk, the gift. Second, depth charges had to be set to explode at a specific depth before being dropped. If the submarine dove or rose during the blind period, the charges exploded uselessly in empty water. The margin for error was essentially 0. Third, even a perfectly executed depth charge attack required a near-direct hit. A U-boat's pressure hull could withstand tremendous force. Depth charges had to detonate within 14 to 15 feet to guarantee a kill. The numbers told the story. In 1942, Allied warships sank approximately 86 U-boats. British statistics showed 5,174 depth charge attacks, achieving 85 confirmed kills over the course of the war, a success rate of less than 2% per attack. Most attacks failed completely. British naval engineers understood these problems intimately. The Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, working at HMS Vernon in Portsmouth, began exploring radical alternatives in 1941. The team was led by Lieutenant Commander Charles Golden, a Canadian chemist turned weapons designer. Golden's insight was deceptively simple. Instead of attacking from behind, attack from ahead. Instead of losing sonar contact, maintain it throughout the attack. Instead of one large charge, use multiple smaller projectiles to blanket the target area. The resulting weapon looked like nothing else on a warship. 24 spigot mortars arranged in 4 rows of 6, mounted on the destroyer's foredeck. Each mortar held a projectile containing 35 pounds of Torpex explosive, 50% more powerful than TNT, pound for pound. The firing sequence was precisely engineered. All 24 projectiles launched simultaneously, creating a circular pattern roughly 130 feet in diameter at the point of impact. The projectiles flew forward in a distinctive arc, looking like a cluster of medieval spears. British sailors called it throwing a hedgehog. The name stuck. But the Hedgehog's most revolutionary feature wasn't its firing pattern. It was what happened when the projectiles hit the water. Standard depth charges used hydrostatic pistols. They exploded at a preset depth, regardless of whether they hit anything. This meant every attack, successful or not, created massive underwater explosions that destroyed sonar effectiveness for several minutes. Ships were deaf after their own attacks. Hedgehog projectiles used contact fuses. They only exploded if they physically struck the submarine's hull. If they missed, they sank harmlessly to the sea floor. The implications were immediate and profound. A Hedgehog attack that produced no explosions meant a miss, but the attacking ship maintained perfect sonar contact. It could immediately launch another attack, and another, and another, until it either succeeded or the submarine escaped. A Hedgehog attack that produced explosions meant a definite hit and almost certainly a kill. The first Hedgehog installation was tested in May. 1,941 inches, Liverpool Bay. Production began in early 1,942. By mid-1942, over 100 ships had been equipped with the new weapon, but results were initially disappointing. Throughout most of 1,942, despite hundreds of attacks, Hedgehog failed to sink a single U-boat. Mechanical problems plagued the early systems. Projectiles misfired. Fuses failed to detonate. Crews struggled with the unfamiliar firing procedures. The breakthrough came in November 1942. HMS Crocus achieved the weapon's first confirmed kill. The success proved the concept worked. Engineers intensified their efforts to resolve the mechanical issues. By early 1943, improved production quality and crew training dramatically increased Hedgehog's effectiveness. On April 23, 1943, Commander Donald MacIver, commanding HMS Hesperus, was escorting convoy ONS-4 when sonar detected a submerged contact. Hesperus had recently been fitted with Hedgehog. MacIver ordered an attack. The attacking run was textbook. Hesperus maintained sonar contact throughout her approach. Speed 15 knots. Range at firing 250 yards. The Hedgehog launcher fired all 24 projectiles in a rippling salvo. 3 seconds later, multiple explosions. Hesperus' crew reported several very heavy underwater explosions. Oil and debris erupted to the surface. U-191 had been on patrol for 23 days. It never surfaced again. All hands lost. German U-boat command initially struggled to understand what was happening. Boats were disappearing without trace, without time to radio warnings. Surviving commanders reported attacks that seemed to come from ahead, attacks that gave no warning, attacks that allowed no evasion. Korvettenkapitän Peter Kruger, commander of U-333, was one of the few to survive a Hedgehog attack and live to document it. His account, written in his 1984 memoir, U-Boat Commander, described the experience with clinical precision. The destroyer came directly at us. This was unusual, but we had practiced emergency deep diving dozens of times. I ordered hard-down planes and a head full. U-333 could dive at nearly 2 meters per second when properly trimmed, fast enough to evade depth charges if we started the dive early enough. Then I heard a sound like hail on a metal roof. Multiple impacts on the upper hull casing, but no explosions. I thought perhaps the destroyer had dropped some new type of marker. 2 seconds later, the world ended. 3. Hedgehog projectiles struck U-333's pressure hull. The first penetrated near the forward torpedo room. The second hit the conning tower base. The third struck amidships. Only the first 2 detonated properly. That single explosion was enough. The forward torpedo room flooded instantly. 4 men died before they could react. The bulkhead door held barely, but U-333 was critically damaged and sinking. Kruger managed to blow ballast tanks and surface. His crew abandoned ship. 43 men survived. U-333 sank, but could be salvaged. Kruger later returned to command of the boats. U-333 itself was repaired and returned to service, only to be sunk on July 31st, 1944, by British warships, using Squid, Hedgehog's more powerful successor. The tactical mathematics were brutally simple. A Hedgehog attack placed 24 projectiles in a 130-foot circle. A Type 7 U-boat, the most common German submarine, was 220 feet long and 20 feet wide. If the aim point was accurate, the submarine presented roughly 4,400 square feet of target area to approximately 13,300 square feet of coverage. By war's end, 1 in 5 Hedgehog attacks achieved at least one hit, a 20% success rate. One hit was generally enough. By comparison, depth charge attacks required the charges to explode within 14 to 15 feet of the pressure hull. Given the 15-minute blind period after explosions and the submarine's ability to maneuver, the probability of success per attack run was roughly 2 to 5%. The difference was categorical, not incremental categorical. Production numbers reflected this understanding. By June 1943, American and British shipyards were installing Hedgehogs on every new destroyer escort and many existing destroyers. The U.S. Navy ordered over 200 Hedgehog installations in 1943 alone. Britain ordered 150. The weapon's effectiveness showed immediately in combat statistics. In 1942, before widespread Hedgehog deployment, Allied ships sank approximately 86 U-boats, mostly using depth charges. Success rate less than 2% per depth charge attacked. In 1943, with Hedgehog entering widespread service, Allied ships sank 213 U-boats. Hedgehog attacks became increasingly common throughout the year. The weapon's success rate started at around 5% per attack in early 1943, improving steadily as crews gained experience and equipment reliability increased. By war's end, British records documented 268 Hedgehog attacks, achieving 47 confirmed kills, nearly one success in every 5 or 6 attacks, 4 to 5 times more effective than depth charges. But those raw numbers understated the weapon's impact. Hedgehog attacks could be repeated immediately. Depth charge attacks required 15 minutes between runs to regain sonar contact after the explosion settled. A destroyer with Hedgehog could make 5 or 6 attacks in the time a conventional ship made one. Commander Donald McIver, commanding HMS Hesperus, demonstrated this capability repeatedly. On one patrol in March 1943, his ship participated in a complex action that resulted in 2 U-boat kills. Though those particular kills came from depth charges in coordination with other ships, McIver quickly became an advocate for Hedgehog after seeing how it maintained constant contact with submerged targets. Ships equipped with Hedgehog could pursue U-boats with relentless precision. Attack, assess, attack, again. No explosions meant a miss, but perfect sonar contact remained. Adjust aim, attack again and again. This pattern repeated throughout 1943 and 1944. Ships equipped with Hedgehog could pursue U-boats with a persistence that was previously impossible. German submarine commanders found themselves hunted by ships that never lost contact, never gave them the traditional window to escape. The psychological impact was significant. Oberleutnant Sur C. Herbert Vesper, who served aboard multiple U-boats throughout the war, described the changing tactical environment in his post-war memoir, Iron Coffins. The old tactics no longer worked. When we heard destroyer screws approaching, we would dive deep and turn hard to port or starboard. The destroyer would pass overhead, drop depth charges behind us, and we would slip away during the confusion and turbulence. This had worked perhaps 70% of the time in 1941 and 1942. But by late 1943, some destroyers no longer passed over us. They came straight at us and stayed on us. They threw explosives ahead of themselves directly into our path. There was no confusion after the attack, no blind period, no escape window. Just relentless, accurate pursuit. Vesper survived the war. Many of his fellow crewmen did not. The weapon wasn't perfect. Early Hedgehog installations suffered from mechanical problems. The spigot mortars sometimes misfired. The contact fuses occasionally failed. Projectiles could tumble in flight, reducing accuracy. British and American engineers responded with continuous improvements. By late 1943, the Mark II Hedgehog featured improved fuses with a 90% reliability rate. Modified stabilization fins reduced tumbling. Enhanced mounting systems reduced misfires to less than 2%. The U.S. Navy also developed mousetraps, lighter versions that fired 4 Mark 20 or 8 Mark 22 projectiles instead of 24. These could be installed on smaller vessels like submarine chasers and patrol craft. While less effective than full Hedgehog installations, mousetraps brought forward-firing anti-submarine weapons to hundreds of additional ships. Training for Hedgehog operations emphasized the weapon's unique characteristics. Unlike depth-charge attacks, where the goal was to saturate an area with explosives, Hedgehog required precise aim. Attack doctrine called for the destroyer to maintain steady course and speed during the final approach, firing when the sonar contact was exactly 250 yards ahead. The Royal Navy's anti-submarine school at HMS Osprey in Portland developed detailed training protocols. Crews practiced on dummy submarines and automated training targets. The emphasis was on patience and precision. Better to make one accurate attack than 3 rushed ones. This represented a fundamental shift in doctrine. Depth charge tactics emphasized aggression and speed. Get to the target fast. Drop charges. Move away. Hedgehog tactics emphasized persistence and accuracy. Maintain contact. Close deliberately. Fire precisely. Repeat until successful. Some experienced depth charge operators initially resisted the new weapon. They argued that the massive explosions from depth charges had a psychological effect on U-boat crews, even when the charges missed. The sustained terror of repeated near misses, they believed, was worth something. But as more successful Hedgehog attacks were documented through 1943 and 1944, resistance faded. The weapon's ability to maintain contact throughout the attack proved decisive. All other considerations became secondary. The statistical evidence supported this conclusion overwhelmingly. By the end of 1944, British ships, equipped with Hedgehog, had documented 47 confirmed U-boat kills from 268 attacks. Ships using only depth charges continued to score kills as well, but required many more attack runs and suffered from the persistent problem of losing contact after each attack. Perhaps more importantly, Hedgehog-equipped ships forced many more U-boats to abandon attacks on convoys. A U-boat commander facing a Hedgehog-equipped escort knew he couldn't rely on the traditional 15-minute blind window. The calculus of the attack changed. The risk increased dramatically. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German U-boat force, acknowledged this in his war diary. In an entry from October 1943, he wrote, "Enemy anti-submarine tactics have improved dramatically. Our boats report attacks that give no opportunity for evasion. This is affecting morale and operational effectiveness." By May 1945, Allied navies had installed Hedgehog systems on hundreds of warships. German U-boat losses had become unsustainable. In 1944 alone, 231 U-boats were lost. In the first 4 months of 1945, another 94 went down. Hedgehog wasn't solely responsible for this. Improved radar, better aircraft coverage, enhanced sonar, and superior code breaking all contributed. But Hedgehog transformed the fundamental tactical equation of submarine versus destroyer. Before Hedgehog, a surfaced U-boat could often fight its way through escort screens using deck guns and speed. A submerged U-boat had roughly even odds of escaping depth charge attacks. After Hedgehog, neither option offered much hope. The weapon continued in service long after the war ended. The U.S. Navy used Hedgehog into the 1,960 seconds before ASROC replaced it. The Royal Navy's more powerful Squid successor remained in service even longer, with HMS Salisbury firing the last Squid rounds in 1977. Several navies, including India and Argentina, operated Hedgehog-equipped vessels into the 1,980 seconds. Modern anti-submarine rockets, like the RUR-5 ASROC, represent direct descendants of Hedgehog's design philosophy. Forward-firing weapons, maintained sonar contact, multiple projectiles. The principles remain unchanged. Korvettenkapitan Peter Kruger survived the war. After his encounter with Hedgehog in November 1943, he continued to command U-boats through multiple patrols. He encountered forward-firing weapons several more times. Each time, survival came through a combination of skill, aggression, and luck. In his post-war years, he spoke frequently at naval history conferences. In a 1987 interview, he was asked if he felt any resentment toward the weapon that nearly killed him. His response was characteristically direct. "How can one resent superior technology? We tried to sink their ships. They tried to sink ours. They developed a better weapon. The result was inevitable." He paused, then added, "Those first few seconds after hearing that sound like hail on our hull before the explosions, those seconds contained more fear than I'd experienced in the entire war up to that point, because I knew in that moment that we'd lost our advantage, and I didn't know if we could adapt fast enough to survive." The numbers supported his assessment. Of the 1,162 U-boats commissioned during World War II, 785 were lost. Of those losses, 246 were sunk by Allied surface ships. British records documented at least 47 confirmed Hedgehog kills. But focusing purely on confirmed kills understates the weapon's impact. Hedgehog fundamentally changed how surface ships hunted submarines. It eliminated the 15-minute blind period that submarines relied on for survival. It allowed repeated attacks without losing contact. It made anti-submarine warfare more precise, more persistent, and more deadly. The weapon's development time was remarkably short. From concept to combat deployment took less than 14 months. This was partly due to Britain's desperate circumstances in 1941. U-boats were winning the Battle of the Atlantic. Britain needed solutions immediately. Lieutenant Commander Golden's team worked with unusual freedom. Traditional procurement procedures were suspended. The team could requisition materials and facilities without lengthy approval processes. Testing happened concurrently with design work. Production began before all trials were complete. This approach carried risks. Early production weapons had higher failure rates than desired. But the alternative, waiting for perfect designs while ships continued sinking, was unacceptable. The Royal Navy deployed Hedgehog, knowing it wasn't perfect, counting on field modifications to resolve problems. That decision proved correct. By late 1943, field modifications and production improvements had reduced failure rates to acceptable levels. By 1944, Hedgehog was more reliable than many conventional weapon systems. The U.S. Navy's adoption of Hedgehog demonstrated effective Allied cooperation. British technical specifications were shared freely. American engineers adapted the design for U.S. production methods. Both nations shared combat feedback and tactical developments. This contrasted sharply with Axis development practices. German and Japanese navies rarely shared technical information. Weapons development often duplicated effort. Japan developed its own forward-firing anti-submarine mortar in 1944, unaware that Britain had solved the same problem 3 years earlier. The Hedgehog's tactical flexibility extended beyond pure submarine hunting. Ships used it to defend against submarines in Norway. It proved effective against shallow water mines. Some destroyers used Hedgehog projectiles for shore bombardment, though this wasn't the intended purpose. Post-war analysis confirmed what combat experience suggested. Hedgehog was approximately 7 times more effective per attack than conventional depth charges. This translated to dramatic improvements in escort efficiency. One Hedgehog-equipped destroyer could cover the same convoy frontage as 3 or 4 depth-charge ships. This had immediate strategic implications. The same number of escorts could protect more convoys, or convoys could sail with fewer escorts, freeing ships for other duties. Either way, Allied naval efficiency increased substantially. German countermeasures proved largely ineffective. U-boats tried deeper diving, but Hedgehog projectiles could be set for various depths. They tried faster evasive maneuvers, but this only worked if the initial sonar contact was imprecise. Against accurate attacks, no amount of maneuverability helped. Some U-boats deployed rubber coating called alberich, designed to absorb sonar pulses. This reduced detection range, but didn't prevent attacks once contact was established. The coating also reduced underwater speed and had poor durability. The most effective German counter wasn't technical. It was operational. U-boats simply avoided convoy routes where Hedgehog-equipped escorts were common. This meant abandoning some of the most target-rich areas, which meant fewer merchant ships sunk, which was, of course, exactly what the Allies wanted. Training records show how quickly crews adapted to Hedgehog. Initial training emphasized the weapon's differences from depth charges, but experienced operators found that many fundamental anti-submarine skills transferred directly. Sonar operation remained critical. Ship handling required the same precision. What changed was the attack geometry and the ability to immediately assess results. No explosions meant a clean miss. Maintain contact, adjust aim, attack again. This immediate feedback loop allowed much faster tactical learning than depth charge attacks, where assessing results required extensive post-attack analysis. Maintenance demands were modest. The spigot mortars required regular inspection, but were mechanically simple. Projectiles could be stored for months without degradation. The entire system could be maintained by standard ship's company personnel without specialized training. This contrasted favorably with more complex systems like the U.S. Navy's Mousetrap, which required more frequent maintenance and had higher failure rates. Simplicity proved valuable in the harsh North Atlantic environment, where equipment reliability could mean the difference between mission success and failure. The weapon's success inspired numerous variants and improvements. The Squid, developed in 1943, fired 3 large projectiles instead of 24 smaller ones. Each Squid projectile contained 207 pounds of Menol explosive, nearly 6 times more than a Hedgehog round. Squid projectiles used time fuses set automatically from the ship's sonar data. This meant they exploded near the submarine, even without direct hits. Squid was more effective than Hedgehog in combat, but also more complex and expensive. Both weapons remained in service because they complemented each other. Hedgehog suited smaller vessels and provided high rates of fire. Squid suited larger frigates and destroyers where its power and automation proved most effective. By late 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic was effectively won. U-boat losses exceeded replacements. German submarine crews faced odds that made survival increasingly unlikely. The Kriegsmarine lost approximately 75% of all U-boat crewmen during the war, over 30,000 men out of 40,000 who served. Hedgehog contributed significantly to this outcome, not through any single dramatic action, but through the cumulative effect of hundreds of attacks that gave submarines no escape window, attacks that forced U-boats away from profitable hunting grounds, attacks that destroyed the tactical advantage submarines had enjoyed since the war's beginning. The weapon represented something larger than just a new piece of hardware. It demonstrated how incremental technical improvements could produce strategic shifts. It showed the value of rapid development and deployment, even when perfection wasn't guaranteed. And it proved that small teams with clear objectives and adequate resources could produce decisive innovations in remarkably short time frames. Lieutenant Commander Golden's team at HMS Vernon numbered fewer than 20 people. They designed, tested, and deployed a weapon system that changed naval warfare in just over a year. Modern anti-submarine warfare owes considerable debt to Hedgehog's design philosophy. Forward-firing weapons, maintained sensor contact, multiple projectiles for area coverage, contact detonation to preserve sensor effectiveness. These principles remain fundamental to ASW operations today. Peter Kruger lived until 1991. He maintained contact with several Allied naval officers he'd fought against, attending reunions and historical conferences. In a 1987 interview, he was asked if he felt any resentment toward the weapon that nearly killed him and ended his military career. His response was characteristically direct. "How can one resent superior technology? We tried to sink their ships. They tried to sink ours. They developed a better weapon. The result was inevitable." He paused, then added, "Though I confess, those first few seconds after hearing that sound like hail on our hull before the explosions, those seconds contained more fear than I'd experienced in the entire war up to that point, because I knew in that moment that we'd lost our advantage, and I didn't know if we could adapt fast enough to survive." 24 projectiles fired simultaneously, in a pattern 130 feet across that changed submarine warfare forever.